Hi, my name is Connor Spiech, and I'm a PhD student from University of Oslo's RITMO Centre for Interdisciplinary Studies in Rhythm, Time, and Motion, and I'll be giving a talk about my pupillometry study on groove. So for the purposes of this talk, I'll be using the word groove to refer to this pleasurable urge to move our bodies to certain kinds of musical rhythms. Past research has found this experience to be maximal when the rhythms are moderately syncopated, and this effect seems to be strengthened by the effect of expertise. This relationship between syncopation, which increases the metric complexity of the music, and groove has been explained in terms of predictive coding. The logic is that at low levels of syncopation, the rhythms are already very predictable, so there's little to no prediction errors to resolve. At moderate levels, however, there are some prediction errors, but they become predictable through repetition, so we know when these metric violations will occur. Then, through active inference, which is just moving our body to make overall sensory inputs more predictable, since we can perfectly predict our own movements, we move to reinforce the meter and suppress these predictable or highly precise prediction errors. When there are too many syncopations, though, the metric structure of the rhythm is too unclear, that is, the prediction errors are too imprecise, so we can't effectively suppress these unpredictable prediction errors with movement. This is essentially what this figure down below represents. So my research question is whether or not we can find neurophysiological evidence to support this, specifically using pupillometry. So far, past research has shown greater pupil dilations in response to syncopated and groovy rhythms compared to unsyncopated and less groovy rhythms, as well as greater pupil dilations with larger microtiming asynchronies. Outside of rhythm, Bianco, Gold, Johnson, and Penhune found larger sustained pupil dilations for liked and predictable melodies, hinting that it may be a good indicator of musical expectations more broadly. Previous studies, however, have tended to use a restricted range of stimuli, some of which may have been confounded, and to our knowledge, no one has looked at the neurophysiological effects of pickups in particular. Unlike syncopations, which subvert metric expectations by omitting strong beats, pickups are weak beat events that reinforce metric expectations by cueing a subsequent strong beat. So while both of these weak beat events may elicit some prediction error signals, it wasn't clear how their different musical roles would manifest in the brain, if at all. So that led us to our four hypotheses here. First, we predicted that sustained pupil dilation would be greatest for rhythms with moderate deviations from isonchrony, where precision-weighted prediction errors would be highest and movement could be used to correct them. Second, we hypothesized that pickups would elicit weaker pupil dilations than syncopations because syncopations lack a subsequent strong beat, making them more surprising and thus requiring more cognitive resources to suppress them. Building off of prior research, we also expected to replicate past findings of an inverted U relationship between metric complexity and groove ratings, with this being stronger in participants with better beat perception using our rigorously controlled stimuli. While some past studies looked at musicianship or dancing as expertise measures, we wanted to connect this directly to a psychoacoustic measure. Finally, since prediction errors become predictable via repetition under predictive coding, we also hypothesized that participants with better beat perception abilities would rate a highly complex rhythm that looped as groovier than those with worse abilities, since their skill would allow them to benefit from that repetition to form a stronger metric model to base their movements on. To test these hypotheses, we recruited 30 subjects with varying amounts of musical ability, as assessed with a brief questionnaire asking how many years of formal musical training they had, which instruments they played, how many hours per week they played music, and how many hours per week they listened to music. We then recorded their pupil diameters as they listened to 6 different drum beats presented 10 times in a pseudo-random order that they rated in terms of how much they wanted to move a lot or not at all, how much they liked it, I liked it a lot or not at all, and how energetic it sounded. The drum beat was very excited or very calm. This last question was just a catch question of arousal that we didn't really care about. We were more interested in the pleasurable urge to move, as assessed with the first 2 questions. Finally, after the pupillometry portion of the experiment, participants completed the computerized adaptive beat alignment test, which is a simple 25-item task where subjects heard clips of real music with a beat track superimposed on them. Each clip was played twice with different beat tracks, and subjects had to respond as to whether the first or the second beat track was on the beat. Their performance was then used to split them into high and low performance groups. So here are the 6 different drum beats that we used in the experiment, starting with the low beat, which is nearly isochronous with the exception of a pickup leading into the one in the next phrase to denote the phrase boundary. That one sounds like this. Next we have the pickups condition, which just shifted this kick drum forward to create a pickup to the snare, and that one sounds like this. Then we have the pickups and syncopation condition, which, in addition to that pickup, shifted these 2 kicks back to create syncopations. And that one sounds like this. Then the syncopation condition had the same two syncopations as the previous, but without the pickup. And that one sounds like this. And then we have the high complexity rhythm, which we tried to make sound more ecologically relevant by basing it off of an Afro-Cuban beat. Its pickups are here and here, and its syncopations are here and here, and it sounds like this. So now all of these 5 rhythms looped 4 times during a trial. So to test our 4th hypothesis, we created a random rhythm that was intended to generate as weak of a metric feel as the high complexity condition, but without this looping. So the first phrase of that sounded like this. So the astute attendees will have noticed that the pickups in syncopation condition had one more deviation from isynchrony than the syncopation condition, yet it's ordered before it. And the reasoning for this is because on Danielsen's musicological analysis here, and partially our later pupillometry results, the syncopation condition felt more unpredictable without the pickup to reinforce the meter. Ultimately, the reordering of these two stimuli didn't change any of our results, but we think that conceptually it makes a bit more sense to order them this way. So now we can finally get into the results. In support of hypothesis 3 and vindicating past findings, we found a significant quadratic relationship between all ratings and metric complexity, with urge to move and pleasure exhibiting a stronger effect than our catch question. Linear models were also significant, but the quadratic models fit better according to the Ancochea information criterion. We then split it into high and low beat perception performance, where we tentatively found more support for the second part of hypothesis 3, although we still need to assess whether these pronounced visual differences in the quadratic effects are statistically significant. Investigating hypothesis 4, we found that high performers on the Kabbat did indeed rate the high complexity rhythm greater in terms of the pleasurable urge to move than the low performers, as expected, without any difference in arousal. We also found that high performers on the Kabbat enjoyed the random rhythm significantly more than the low performers. Moving on to the pupillometry results, here are the clean pupil traces plotted over time by rhythm condition. The two big things to note here are the classic stimulus onset response in the pupil during the first repetition, as indicated by the dashed lines, and the overall signal drift that seems to level off and hit a floor around the third repetition. Regarding the onset response, the high complexity and random conditions actually resulted in greater dilations because neither of these rhythms started with isochronous kick snares on the first 2 beats, making them immediately identifiable as oddballs of sorts given our pseudo-randomization, which aligns well with the literature. While all subjects' attention seemed to wane over time for all conditions, we believe that the rate at which the pupil signal attenuated could differ by rhythm, since actively correcting prediction errors would require more sustained attention. To this end, we focused our analyses of sustained attention on the second repetition window, which was untainted by the stimulus onset effect and before it hit the floor. And so this is what we found. Supporting our first hypothesis, we found a significant quadratic relationship between the pupil drift rate and metric complexity. Neither the null nor linear models were significant for this data. Finally, using the first 4 stimuli, we orthogonally measured the effects of pickups, which were either present or absent, and syncopations, which were present or absent, on both the pupillometric arousal and subjects' groove ratings. Here we found 2 separate patterns of results. For the pupillometry, we found significant main effects of pickups and time on average pupil size with no effect of syncopation or interaction. To identify the time windows where this effect emerged, we ran repeated measures of novas at each 100 millisecond time bin, and after correcting for multiple comparisons, we identified these 2 windows that began around the onset of the pickups, implying that the pickups evoked greater pupil dilations. For the groove ratings, on the other hand, we found the opposite effect. There was a significant main effect of syncopation, but no effect of pickups or interaction, showing that regardless of whether there were pickups, syncopations elicited stronger feelings of groove and excitement. So to summarize, we found more evidence of the canonical inverted U relationship between metric complexity and the pleasurable urge to move, demonstrating that previous studies were not methodologically confounded. We also found that these greater feelings of groove were associated with more sustained attention as indexed by the pupil's drift rate. Next, by using a psychoacoustic measure of beat perception, we found that the expertise-related differences in groove in the literature might arise from a finer ability to perceive small differences in the beat. Contrary to our initial prediction, we found that the brain appears to deploy more attention to pickups rather than less, perhaps to enhance their prediction errors without movement because they directly cue strong beats that are highly informative of the metric structure themselves. Syncopations, on the other hand, subvert this structure since they lack that subsequent strong beat the pickups have, and thus demand our movement to fill the gap. As for what's next, we're currently analyzing evoked responses to the pickups and syncopations directly using both pupillometry and EEG, as well as confirming that sensory precision does indeed decrease with increasing metric complexity using entrainment measures. We're also interested in seeing whether evoked or entrained response models fit our pupillometry and EEG data better, as well as further exploring individual differences in beat perception in group. Thanks for your attention so late into the conference.